The topic that we will be discussing today is a historical event. And an historical event always comes like a thief in the night. You can't determine when a historical event happens. What you can do is respond to it. And you can choose to respond to it in such a way that you contest it. You can respond to it by ignoring it, or you can respond to it by critically embracing it, offering critique, and trying to make sure that historical event works for your population. And we're talking today about the population of St. Martin. In a few minutes, we will have a speech of the Prime Minister of The Hague, who will be announcing the question of apologies and the questions of how to repair the damage that was done. After that, we will have the Minister of Health, Minister Kuipers, who will then, if people have not been able to follow the subtitling, he will then once again read out the speech in English, because it's important that everyone understands what was said. After that, we will have the Prime Minister of St. Martin, who will then have a panel, introduce a panel, who will give a first response to the speech of the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, the response of the Prime Minister of St. Martin, the speech of Minister Kuipers. Then I would invite every one of you to engage in the conversation together. After the conversation, we will have some final remarks of Minister Kuipers. Then I will close the session. So I hope we can do it with enough dignity. One person I'd like to acknowledge who is here, and this is the reason why I came to St. Martin, because I was called about this and I said, you know, why should I come for this event? And I realized I'm coming because Ms. Vero, as I call her, Ms. Veronica Arundel, I realized that when I was a youngster here, she was the person who kept the memory of the resistance against slavery alive, who also told us, have respect. That's the reason I took the plane, and that's the reason why I'm here today for this event. Yeah, so right now we'll have the Prime Minister of The Hague speaking. In about 2 minutes, the speech will begin. There's some issues with the weather. In 2 minutes, the Prime Minister begins his speech. Apologies for the delay.
Online, maar natuurlijk ook voor de mensen op de eilanden en de landen binnen het Koninkrijk en in Suriname. En daarna is er de mogelijkheid voor de pers om een aantal 1-op-1 gesprekken te voeren. En dan is er voor de aanwezigen hier de mogelijkheid om verder het gesprek voor te zetten, maar zover is het nog niet. Ik geef graag eerst het woord aan minister-president Mark Rutte.
En voor iedereen die meekijkt of luistert in een andere tijdzone, boa morgen, bon dia, good morning. Hier in het Nationaal Archief spreekt de geschiedenis tot ons in miljoenen documenten. En ook al horen we de ongeschreven stem is niet alleen maar mooi. Het is vaak ook lelijk, pijnlijk en zelfs ronduit beschamend. Dat geldt zeker voor de rol van Nederland in het slavernijverleden. Wij, levend in het hier en nu, kunnen slavernij alleen in de allerduidelijkste bewoordingen erkennen en veroordelen als misdaad tegen de menselijkheid. Als een misdadig systeem dat wereldwijd onnoemelijk veel mensen, onnoemelijk veel en groot leed heeft gebracht. En dat doorwerkt in de levens van mensen hier en nu. En wij in Nederland moeten ons aandeel archief ontmoeten. Hier ligt ons nationale geheugen opgeslagen. Dus dit is de plek voor nationaal gewetensonderzoek. Hier kun je niet om de historische feiten heen. Tot 1814 werden ruim 600.000 tot slaafgemaakte Afrikaanse vrouwen, mannen en kinderen onder erbarmelijke omstandigheden naar het Amerikaanse continent verscheept door Nederlandse slaafhandelaren. De meeste naar Suriname, maar ook naar Curaçao, Sint-Eustatius en andere plaatsen. Zij werden weggerukt uit hun families, ontmenselijkt, als vee vervoerd en behandeld. Vaak onder het overheidsgezag van de West-Indische Compagnie. In Azië werden tussen de 660.000 en ruim 1 miljoen mensen, we weten het niet eens precies, de getallen zijn onvoorstelbaar. Het menselijk leed dat erachter schuil gaat is nog veel onvoorstelbaarder. Talloos zijn de overgeleverde verhalen en getuigenissen die bewijzen hoe er in het slavernijsysteem geen maat stond op wreedheid en willekeur. En dus ook geen maat op onrecht en pure angst. We hoeven alleen maar lezen over gezeling en marteling tot de dood erop volgde. Over mensen van wie ledematen werden afgehakt. Over brandmerken in het gezicht. Het lot van de ene persoon nog verschrikkelijker dan van de andere. Op elke pagina onrecht en nog meer onrecht. En zoals Anton de Kom het beschreef voor Suriname, zo gebeurde het ook elders, onder hetzelfde Nederlandse overheidsgezag. We lezen het, we weten het, en toch is het afschuwelijke lot van tot slaaf gemaakte mensen nauwelijks te bevatten. Of neem inderdaad de feiten zoals die uit de archieven spreken. Bijvoorbeeld uit de enorme administratie die is opgezet rond de afschaffing van de slavernij in 1863 en die hier ingezien kan worden. Pagina na pagina staan daarop per plantage en per slaveneigenaar de namen vermeld van tot slaafgemaakte plus nog enkele andere persoonlijke gegevens. Zakelijk, systematisch, in een droge opsomming, die juist daardoor zo confronterend is. Omdat het de absurditeit onderstreept van een systeem waarin de ene mens de andere mens de tot slaaf gemaakten hardvochtiger, nog oneerlijker. Want iedereen die in Suriname in 1863 in naam vrij werd, moest gedwongen nog 10 jaar lang onder staatstoezicht blijven werken. De facto betekende dat voor velen nog 10 jaar langer een leven in onvrijheid, een leven onder dwang. Tot 1873. Komend jaar is dat 150 jaar geleden. Die geschiedenis houdt ons bezig. Een complexe geschiedenis waarin op verschillende plaatsen, verschillende jaartallen en gebeurtenissen betekenis hebben. Niet alleen 1863 en 1873, maar bijvoorbeeld ook 1860, de wettelijke afschaffing van de slavernij in toenmalig Nederlands-Indië. 1814, het jaar dat ook Nederland de transatlantische slavenhandel afschafte. 1848, toen op Sint Maarten de slavernij de facto voorbij was. Of bijvoorbeeld 1795, toen onder leiding van Tula op Curaçao een opstand plaatsvond die nog jaarlijks wordt herdacht. Eindeloos veel momenten, eindeloos veel verhalen, eindeloos veel geschiedenis. Die geschiedenis krijgt de laatste jaren meer aandacht in tentoonstellingen, in publicaties en ook in het maatschappelijk debat. Er vindt maatschappelijke bewustwording plaats. En daardoor ook een verandering in het denken. Dat is goed en terecht en nodig, want te lang is het stilgebleven. Dat het niet goed mogelijk is op een betekenisvolle manier verantwoordelijkheid te nemen voor iets dat zo lang geleden is en waar niemand van onszelf bij is geweest. Lange tijd dacht ik dus eigenlijk, het slavernijgeleden, dat is geschiedenis die achter ons ligt. Maar ik had het mis. Want eeuwen van onderdrukking en uitbuiting werken door in het hier en nu. In racistische stereotypen. In discriminerende patronen van uitsluiting. In sociale ongelijkheid. En om dat te doorbreken, moeten we ook het verleden open en eerlijk onder ogen zien. Een verleden dat we delen met andere landen, waardoor onze samenlevingen voor altijd op een speciale manier met elkaar zijn verbonden. Het klopt dat niemand die nu leeft persoonlijk schuld draagt voor de slavernij. Maar het klopt ook dat de Nederlandse staat in al zijn historische verschijningsvormen verantwoordelijkheid draagt voor het grote leed dat tot slaafgemaakten en hun nazaten is aangedaan. En dus kunnen we niet voorbijgaan aan de doorwerking van het verleden in onze tijd. Het rapport Ketenen van het Verleden Dat rapport verscheen op 1 juli vorig jaar en bevatte een aantal niet mis te verstaande conclusies en aanbevelingen. De 3 kernwoorden zijn erkenning, excuses, herstel. Vandaag sturen we de officiële kabinetsreactie naar de Tweede Kamer. Daarin omarmen we de analyse en conclusies van de dialooggroep. In de tussenliggende 1,5 jaar heeft het kabinet op verschillende manieren, op verschillende plekken en met verschillende mensen en groepen over het slavernijverleden gesproken. Ik ben zelf in september jongstleden in Suriname geweest, waar ik heb geleerd hoe diep de geschiedenis nog altijd ingrijpt in het dagelijks per groep en per persoon kunnen verschillen. Het maakt uit of je voorouders uit Afrika werden geroofd of behoorden tot de oorspronkelijke bewoners. Het maakt uit in welk land of regio hun leven zich afspeelde. En het maakt ook uit in welke periode zij leefden. Die historische, geografische en culturele verschillen tussen bevolkingsgroepen en mensen, die doen ertoe. Ook in het hier en nu. En dat maakt het doen van algemene uitspraken over het slavernijverleden ook zo kwetsbaar? Want hoe doe je recht aan al die verschillen? Wat is daarvoor het beste moment? Hoe doe je recht aan alle spirituele symbolen en rituelen? Zoveel pijn, zoveel gruwelijkheden. Elke poging daartoe zal altijd onvolkomen zijn en nieuwe vragen en discussies oproepen. Met alle emoties die daarbij horen. Met alle beladenheid. We weten dat er niet één goed moment is voor iedereen. Niet de juiste woorden voor iedereen. Niet één juiste plaats voor iedereen. En ik erken dat de aanloop naar deze dag beter had gekund. Maar laat dat geen reden zijn dan maar niets te doen. Over het slavernijverleden alsjeblieft voeren. Ook als dat erkenning van het afschuwelijke leed dat generaties tot slaafgemaakten is aangedaan. Erkenning van en eerherstel voor al die mensen die in het verzet kwamen. Zoals de dappere Marrons van Suriname. Ik noem vandaag met eerbied de namen van Tula op Curaçao, Jolicoeur, Boni en Baron in Suriname, Wan Teteloke op Sint Maarten. En we gedenken al die naamloos gebleven vrouwen en mannen die door de eeuwen heen heldhaftig de vrijheid zochten en er vaak op de meest gruwelijke manier voor werden gestraft. En natuurlijk erkenning van historische verantwoordelijkheid. Met de woorden die daarbij horen. Deze woorden. Eeuwenlang hebben de Nederlandse staat en zijn vertegenwoordigers slavernij mogelijk gemaakt, gestimuleerd, in stand gehouden en ervan geprofiteerd. Eeuwenlang zijn in naam van de Nederlandse staat mensen tot handelswaar gemaakt, uitgebuit en mishandeld. Eeuwenlang is onder Nederlands staatsgezag de menselijke waardigheid met voeten getreden en erkent dat het slavernijverleden een negatieve doorwerking had en heeft. Daarvoor bied ik namens de Nederlandse regering excuses aan. Today I apologize. Awe mi tapidi disculpa. Tide miwani taki pardon. Vandaag bied ik namens de Nederlandse regering excuses aan voor het handelen van de Nederlandse staat in het verleden. Postuum aan alle tot slaafgemaakten die wereldwijd onder dat handelen hebben geleden. Aan hun dochters en zonen en aan al hun nazaten tot in het hier en nu. We doen dit niet om schoon schip te maken. Niet om staande op de drempel van een belangrijk herdenkingsjaar samen de weg vooruit te vinden. We delen niet alleen het verleden, maar ook de toekomst. Dus zetten we vandaag een komma, geen punt. Het gesprek over het slavernijverleden moet zo breed mogelijk worden gevoerd. Niet alleen in Nederland, maar juist ook op de plekken waar het gebeurde. Met iedereen die betrokken is of zich betrokken voelt. Daarom klinken de excuses die ik net uitsprak vandaag door op 7 andere plekken in de wereld. Daar waar de pijn en de gevolgen van het slavernijverleden tot de dag van vandaag het meest worden gevoeld en het meest zichtbaar zijn. Ze klinken door in de woorden die worden uitgesproken door 7 vertegenwoordigers van de Nederlandse regering. In Suriname, op Curaçao, op Sint Maarten, op Aruba, op Bonaire, op Saba en op Sint Eustatius. De regering wil in overleg met alle groepen en mensen uit alle landen, waarmee wij dit verleden delen, intensiever werken aan meer kennis over het slavernijverleden en dus aan meer bewustwording. En we kunnen het werk alleen in gezamenlijkheid doen. Op weg naar die belangrijke symbolische datum, 1 juli 2023. Daarna in het hele herdenkingsjaar. En in de jaren die daarop volgen. De kabinetsreactie op het rapport van de dialooggroep Slavernijverleden gaat hier uitvoerig op in. Het belangrijkste is dat we alle stappen die we gaan zetten ook echt gezamenlijk zetten. Heling in het heden. Een komma, geen punt. Met Suriname, met de Caribische delen van het Koninkrijk en met alle nazaten in Nederland werken we aan zichtbaarheid van erfgoed, aan bewustwording via onderwijs en aan wetenschappelijk historisch onderzoek. Tijdens het herdenkingsjaar zullen alle facetten van het slavernijverleden en de doorwerking in onze tijd in het volle licht staan. De koning voelt zich persoonlijk zeer betrokken bij het onderwerp en zal over 2023 heen. Een onafhankelijk en breed samengesteld herdenkingscomité buigt zich over de beste manier om ook in de toekomst waardig en zoveel mogelijk gezamenlijk te herdenken. En er komt een fonds voor maatschappelijke initiatieven in het hele Koninkrijk en Suriname, waarmee de doorwerking van het slavernijverleden de zichtbaarheid, de aandacht en aanpak krijgt die nodig is. Het helingsproces moet nu beginnen. En het programma daarvoor schrijven we samen. Dames en heren, het boek van onze gedeelde geschiedenis kent veel pagina's die ons, levend in de 21e eeuw, met verbijstering en afschuw vervullen. En met diepe schaamte. Die pagina's wissen we met excuses niet uit. En dat is ook niet de bedoeling. We kunnen het verleden niet veranderen. Alleen onder ogen zien. Wat de regering vurig hoopt, wat ik ook persoonlijk vurig hoop, is dat dit moment, dat deze dag ons helpt, koninkrijksbreed en samen met Suriname en andere landen, de open pagina's die voor ons liggen, in te vullen met dialoog, erkenning en heling. Dank u wel.
Mag ik graag iedereen die genodigd is uitnodigen om nog bij koffie en een drankje met elkaar in gesprek te gaan. En dan zal voor de pers de mogelijkheid zijn om enkele 1-op-1 vragen te stellen, waarbij de televisie daar zal worden gepositioneerd en de schrijvende pers daar in die hoek. Dank u wel voor uw aandacht.
Rutte just expressed. He started with, obviously, in the time zone of the Netherlands, expressing good afternoon, and he will say good morning. He said for anyone listening or watching in another time zone, also, bon morgen and good morning. Minister Rutte continued, history speaks to us through millions of documents. And I recount here the unwritten voices from the past. The story that emerges from all of those documents is not always pretty. Often it is ugly, it is painful, and even downright shameful. That is certainly the case with the role of the Netherlands in the history of slavery. We who live in today's world must acknowledge the evils of slavery in the clearest possible terms and condemn it as a crime against humanity. As a criminal system which caused untold numbers of people untold suffering. Suffering that continues in the lives of people today. And we in the Netherlands must confront our part in that history. It is therefore good that the group in the Netherlands, as Prime Minister Rutte expressed, is at the moment gathered at the National Archives. That is the home of our national memory. So it is the place to examine our national conscience. There you can't get around the historical facts. By 1814, more than 600,000 enslaved African women, men, and children had been shipped to the American continent in deplorable conditions by Dutch slave traders. Most were taken to Suriname, but others were sent to Curaçao, to St. Eustatius, and here to Sint Maarten and other locations. They were wrenched from their families and stripped of their humanity. They were transported and treated like cattle, often under the governmental authority of the Dutch West India Company. In Asia, between 660,000 and over 1 million people, we don't even know exactly how many, were traded within the areas under the authority of the Dutch East India Company. The numbers were unimaginable. The human suffering behind them even more unimaginable. Countless stories have been passed down and witness testimonies been given, proving that there was no limit to the arbitrary cruelty of the slave system, and thus no limit to the injustice and the sheer terror. We need only to open Anton de Kom's book, We Slaves of Suriname, to read about the most horrific treatment and punishment. We read of people being flogged and tortured to death, of people whose limbs were hacked off or whose faces were branded with hot irons. Each person's fate more gruesome than the last. Injustice upon injustice with every turn of the page. And just as Anton de Kom described the horrors of Suriname, other horrors unfolded elsewhere under the same Dutch governmental authority. We can read about it, we can know about it, and still the awful fate of the people who were enslaved is barely conceivable. So let us consider the hard facts contained in the archives. Take, for example, the enormous administrative system set up around the time that slavery was abolished in 1863. We can still study those records here today. Page after page, list the names and a few other personal details of enslaved people, registered by plantation and owner. The records are dry and concise, businesslike and systematic, which makes them all the more shocking, because they underline the absurdity of a system in which one human being makes another commodity. A system so inhumane and unjust that in 1863 it was not the enslaved people who received financial compensation from the state, but the slave owners. And yet it could be even more cruel, even more unfair, because everyone who normally gained their freedom in Suriname in 1863 was forced to keep working under the supervision of the state for another 10 years. For many, this meant another 10 years of living an unfree life, a life of subjugation until 1873, which is 150 years ago next year. That history concerns us all, a complex history in which different years and different events carry significance in different places. Not just in 1863 and 1873, but 1862, for instance, the year in which slavery in the Dutch East Indies was formally abolished. In 1814, when the Netherlands abolished its transatlantic slave trade. In 1848, the de facto end of slavery here on Sint Maarten. Or 1795, when Tula the revolt on Curaçao that is stimulated every year. So many moments, so many stories, and so much history. In recent years, that history has gained more attention in exhibitions, in publications, and in the public debate. Social awareness is growing, and that is leading to a change in the way we think. This is good and appropriate and necessary, for the silence has gone on too long. I have experienced this change in thinking personally. Prime Minister said, I want to be open about that. For a long time, I thought that we could not easily take meaningful responsibility for something that had happened so long ago, something that none of us experienced firsthand. For a long time, I thought that the Netherlands' role in slavery was a thing of the past, something we had put behind us. But I was wrong. Centuries of oppression and exploitation still have an effect to this very day. In racist stereotypes, in discriminatory patterns of exclusion, in social inequality. And to break those patterns, we also have to face up to the past, openly and honestly. A past that we share with other countries and that has forged a special connection between our societies for all time. It is true that no one alive now is personally to blame for slavery. But it is also true that the Dutch state, in all its manifestations through history, bears responsibility for the terrible suffering inflicted on enslaved people and their descendants. So we cannot ignore the effects of the past on the present. The report entitled Change of the Past by the Slavery History Dialogue Group is playing an important role in the process of growing awareness that many of us are experiencing. The report was published on the 1st of July 2021. And it contains a number of hard-hitting conclusions and clear recommendations. The three key words are acknowledgement, apology, and recovery. Today we are sending the official government response to this report to the Dutch House of Representatives. In that response, we embrace the analysis and conclusions of this dialogue group. In the intervening year and a half, the government has spoken about the history of slavery in various ways, in various places, and with various people and groups. The Prime Minister himself was in Suriname last September, where he learned how deeply history still affects people's daily lives, including in a spiritual sense. He also learned how experiences, memories, and feelings can be different for each group and each individual. It makes a difference whether your forebears were stolen from Africa or were members of the indigenous population. It makes a difference in which country or region they lived their lives. And it also makes a difference in which period they lived. Those historical, geographical, and cultural differences between population groups and individuals matter to this very day. And this means that making general statements about the history of slavery is a very delicate matter. How do you do justice to all those differences? What is the best moment? How do you do justice to all the spiritual symbols and rituals that are so very important to certain cultures? And how can you encapsulate so much injustice, so much pain, so many atrocities in mere words? Any attempt to do so will always fall short and will give rise to new questions and discussions with all the emotions that it entails, with all the tensions that it creates. We know there isn't one right moment for everyone. There are no right words for everyone, nor one right place for everyone. And I acknowledge that the build-up to this day could have been better, but we mustn't let that be a reason to simply do nothing. We must take steps forward together. We must progress together. So please, let's have that conversation about the Netherlands' role in the history of slavery, even if it is difficult. That conversation begins with acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of the terrible suffering inflicted on generations of enslaved people. Acknowledgement and rehabilitation of all those who put up resistance, like the courageous Maroons of Suriname. Today, the Prime Minister said, I respectfully speak the names of Tula and Curaçao, Jolicoeur, Boni and Baron in Suriname, and Wan Tete Lokai here on Sint Maarten. And we remember all the nameless women and men who courageously strived for freedom throughout the centuries and often suffered the most horrific punishments. And of course, acknowledgement of the historical responsibility together with the appropriate words. These words. For centuries, the Dutch state and its representatives facilitated, stimulated, preserved, and profited from slavery. For centuries, in the name of the Dutch state, human beings were made into commodities, exploited and abused. For centuries, under Dutch state authority, human dignity was violated in the most horrific way possible. And successive Dutch governments after 1863 failed to adequately see and acknowledge that our slavery past continued to have negative effects and still does. For that, we offer the apologies of the Dutch government. Today, on behalf of the Dutch government, we apologize for the past actions of the Dutch state. To enslave people in the past everywhere in the world who suffered as a consequence of those actions, as well as to their daughters and sons and to all their descendants up to the present day. We are doing this not to wipe the slate clean, not to close the book on the past and leave it behind us. We're doing this and doing it now so that standing on the cusp of an important commemorative year, we can find a way forward together. We not only share a past, we share a future too. So with this apology, we are writing not a full stop, but a comma. The dialogue on the history of slavery should be held as broadly as possible, not only in the Netherlands, but also and especially in the places where it happened, with everyone who is involved or feels involved. And that's why the apology I just offered will be echoed today in 7 other places in the world. Places where the pain and consequences of slavery are felt the most and are the most visible to this very day. It will be echoed in the words spoken by 7 representatives in the Dutch government, in Suriname, on Curaçao, here on Sint Maarten, on Aruba, on Bonaire, on Saba, and on St. Eustatius. In consultation with all the groups and individuals from all the countries with which we share this history, the government wants to work more intensively to enhance knowledge of the history of slavery, thus ensuring more awareness, acknowledgement, and understanding. This process will take time, and we can only do this together. On the road to that important symbolic day of the 1st of July next year, 2023, and then throughout the year of commemoration and in the years that follow. The government response to the report by the Slavery History Dialogue Group discusses this extensively. It is vital that the steps we take now are truly taken together by talking and listening to each other. And in doing so, with one purpose, doing justice to the past and healing in the present. A comma, not a full stop. Together with Suriname, the Caribbean parts of the kingdom, and all the descendants in the Netherlands, we are working to make cultural heritage more visible, to foster awareness through education, and to encourage academic historic research. During the year of commemoration, all facets of the history of slavery and its effect, up to the present day, will be brought to light. The King personally feels very engaged with this subject and will be present at the commemoration and celebration in Amsterdam on the 1st of July next year. And we are looking beyond 2023. An independent and broadly composed commemoration committee will consider the best way to respectfully commemorate the past as collectively as possible in the future. We will also set up a fund for social initiatives throughout the Kingdom and Suriname, so that the impact of the history of slavery is given the visibility, attention, and action that is needed. The healing process must start now, and we will write the program for that process together. Ladies and gentlemen, the book of our shared history has many pages that fill us as people of the 21st century with dismay and horror, and with deep shame. Those pages cannot be erased with an apology, nor should they be. We cannot change the past, but we can face up to it. What the government fervently hopes is that this moment, this day, will help us throughout the kingdom and together with Suriname and other countries to fill the empty pages that lie ahead with dialogue, acknowledgement, and healing. And with that, Prime Minister Rutte thanked the audience. And that gives me the opportunity to then continue with that, what I personally had to tell you here in Sint Maarten, with my gratitude for your hospitality and for my apology that I give them 2 speeches in consecutive order. We've just heard the words of the Dutch Prime Minister, apologizing for the Dutch role in the history of slavery and on how this affects the present. You have expressed the need for more time to formulate your position on this topic and its impact. Please rest assured that we are fully open to continue our dialogue on this history for as long as you need. And please know that we acknowledge that the Dutch role in slavery on this island was a significant one. In the salt pond and on the plantations, enslaved people labored for generations. An inventory of the Golden Rock plantation contains a list of enslaved people and their so-called value. According to that elusive document, a woman who had lost a leg was considered worthless. How had she, her name was Marianne, become disabled? Was she injured during slave labor? Had she been shot in the leg for trying to escape a permissible punishment at the time? Or was it the result of an untreated medical condition? To the Golden Rock plantation inventory, that part of her story was irrelevant. It feels uncomfortable as a European Dutchman to be speaking about slavery. Because of what the Dutch state did to your ancestors, they did not see those ancestors and the indigenous people of St. Martin as human beings, not as someone's daughter, not as someone's son, but as a means of production. Slavery is an extremely painful and shameful chapter in our shared history. Impossible to be undone by mere words. But acknowledging what happened, taking responsibility and preserving the testimonies and stories we have can be a start. That is why members of the Dutch government are currently visiting, to reflect on the Prime Minister's words, to acknowledge that the impact of slavery still resounds to this very date, to try to do justice to that terrible history. The story of one Tete Lokai made a huge impression on me. And on my way here, I paid a visit to her monument. Her story, like many others, symbolizes strength, courage, and fearlessness. You tell your children this story, but it should also be told to children in the Netherlands because it shows people's resilience in the face of oppression. According to that story, which is very well known to you, Lokai worked on a sugar plantation. She ran away, but unfortunately was caught. As a punishment, the plantation owner cut off one of her breasts, a horrific violation, which would be enough to break most people. But Lokai once more fled. And this time she succeeded and fled for good, but she paid a huge price for her freedom. On an island this size, those who escaped could not live in groups, so Lokai had to spend the rest of her life in isolation. Her story is a symbol of resistance to the unimaginable injustice done to so many of your ancestors. And that resistance took many forms. Petit marronnage, for example, working as slowly as one safely could, pretending an instruction was incomprehensible. Or fleeing one's captors, first alone and then with others from different plantations, until finally in 1848, large groups of enslaved people managed to reach freedom on the French side of the island. Those who remained behind started negotiations on their own freedom, and they succeeded in acquiring new rights from their oppressors. As a result, former slaveholders and formerly enslaved people lived on somewhat more equitable terms, even though, according to law, slavery was still in place. This did not happen elsewhere in the world. Your ancestors were unique in this respect. Evidently, this does not alter at all what happens at that time and ever since. The past cannot be undone and stays with us now and forever. It is in the former plantations and in the slave walls you see all over this island. It is in our demography, and it is in the interaction between our countries. We only have to look at the conversations we've had in the past weeks in the run-up to this moment. They underline how much pain the past and our country's relations have caused some of our people. A pain that I can never fully experience, however much I will try to. Hopefully the Dutch apology will mark the beginning of a further dialogue. You have rightfully asked for acknowledgement of your suffering, and today we are taking a step in that direction. A first step, and many more steps will have to follow. As you have pointed out, your history is also the history of the Netherlands, and that history should receive the attention it deserves. It is frustrating that so much historical material has been lost or still needs to be brought to light. Enslaved people were denied surnames, making family ties almost impossible to trace. That is a painful reality, because everyone wants to know where they come from, to know which heroic figures from their past they can honor. People like Mary Ann and one Tete Lokai. Their stories and tales are tales of resistance, of resilience, the kind of resilience that is typical for the people of Sint Maarten. The resilience that the world saw after the destruction caused by Hurricane Irma. We have a duty to keep these stories of your resilience alive, and thankfully that does happen. The archivist and historian Alfonso Blijden made it his life's work to find those stories, scouring the archives for information about them. In his classroom, he brought those documents to life so that Sint Maarten could learn the stories he discovered. This led him to be asked to join UNESCO's Memory of the World Program Committee for Latin America and the Caribbean. Veronica Arendel tells people, young and old, about all of Sint Maarten's cultural heritage, including its history of slavery. In doing so, she helps preserve the ongoing connection with the history of this island and its inhabitants, native and non-native. The string band, Tony and the Boys, kept Sint Maarten's musical heritage alive, mixing traditional sounds with new musical influences. And these are all prime examples of the rediscovery, preservation, and proudful expression of your cultural heritage. It is crucial that we all take over the baton from them, together, in solidarity. And we can, exploring and sharing our common past, both here and in the Netherlands. I myself will tell the stories of Lokai, of Veronica Arendel, Alfonso Blijden, and Tenny and the Boys. Above all, I'll tell the people about you, the people I meet here, and the stories you share with me. But that alone is not enough. For some years now, there has rightly been more focus on the role of the Netherlands in the history of slavery, through newspapers, TV programs, and podcasts. Next year, all kinds of activities will take place commemorating the end of slavery and the role of Dutch government in slavery, to show that we in the Netherlands want to look more closely in the mirror of the past. But it won't stop there either. We shall preserve the link to the past by making sure our education systems, both here and in the Netherlands, incorporate the subject of slavery and resistance in the curriculum. We will also examine how we deal with the records that concern both Dutch and Sint Maarten's history. We promise the public archives concerning Sint Maarten will be made accessible from here. It is my hope that together we can uncover more and more stories, give them meaning, and keep retelling them, both here and in the fascinating melting pot of cultures that is Sint Maarten, as well as in the Netherlands, so that the impact of these stories, of this history, remains palpable today and in the future. By sharing these stories, we stand face to face with the horrendous acts of the past. By sharing these stories, we can better understand each other. And by sharing these stories, we continue to build our relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, we share a painful past. Let us move together to a brighter future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Kuipers. Thank you for once again rereading the speech of the Prime Minister and thereafter acknowledging some of the heroes of St. Martin. Once again, I said this would be a historical event, and then you would have necessarily ways of responding to this historical event. One way is to contest it, another way is to ignore it, a third way is to critically embrace it with enough critique and to try to make it work for your population. I think we should now take the time, because we're coming to the moment in which you start to converse, talk about this matter. So we will give some time right now to the Honorable Prime Minister of St. Martin to be able to give a first response to this. Thank you, Prime Minister. Could we get a hand for the Prime Minister?
I actually needed a minute for the restroom, if you don't mind, before I start. So with your indulgence. No.
Let's take a break.
Check. Check.
Since I interrupted the proceedings, I'll give you a few minutes to find your seats. Easy to sit and listen for such a long time, so I think the break was well needed. I take the words, thank you, Francio, for the introduction, and welcome, Minister, to St. Martin. I have taken claim to have that information beforehand. I will go with my prepared words and hopefully, as Francio mentioned, critically embrace the statements that have been made here this morning. Dear people of St. Martin, both South and North, our sisters and brothers in Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire, Saba, St. Eustatius, Suriname, and to the indigenous people of this region and the people of the wider diasporas across the Caribbean and Atlantic worlds. I address you today with mixed emotions and extend an invitation to openly dialogue on the ways to approach this abrupt and forced apology for slavery passed by the Netherlands. This is a us all. Why mixed emotions, one may ask? Because on one hand, the seriousness of the occasion, if it is sincere, is not lost on me, especially seeing the recent public statements on this topic. On the other hand, the manner in which we arrive here today is, to say it quite honestly, messy, and exposes many risks in the realization of true reparatory justice for those impacted by the transatlantic slave trade, the enslavement of our ancestors, and subsequent racism, marginalization, and continued existence of colonialism in the relationship and institutions which still exist within our kingdom. Along with my colleagues throughout the Dutch Caribbean, I find myself forced to confront our traumatic histories according to the schedule and timeline set by the government of the Netherlands. And because these heartfelt sentiments comprise more emotion than one is allowed to express in post-coloniality, I am compelled to secure justice for our ancestral pains by means of formalities and speeches. On behalf of the Council of Ministers, I have, on several occasions, mentioned to the State Secretary of Interior Affairs and Kingdom politicians in the Netherlands, to the Parliament of St. Martin and the people of St. Martin, that we are not at the stage that we can either accept or reject the statement/apologies. Because honestly speaking, up until today, I stand by that statement, despite the manner in which the Dutch press attempts to spin the narrative on this topic to justify those in the Netherlands who seek to undermine this statement, this apology, and exact political control. We are cognizant also on this side of the Atlantic of the realities of the political atmosphere in the Netherlands, the wider European community, and even the United States. It is why this past year has been rife with the Black Lives Matter movement, which I believe also shone a light on the need for today's apology. Forced to hear us. It was explained that this is not the way from our side, that this is not the way to properly dialogue on a topic of such enormous proportions. Repeatedly, this sentiment has been conveyed that it is in poor taste to move full steam ahead with an apology before proper dialogue has taken place, without proper respect for the feelings of the people who you want to apologize to, the descendants of those who endured, as was mentioned here today, the most devastating crime against humanity. Yet today, here we are, present. Whilst, as Mr. Guadalupe mentioned, we could have silently protested. We could have stayed away. Hearing a statement heretofore shrouded in secrecy as to what the real motives are, what is the need for haste, and significance of today's chosen date leaves still many a question. So my questions are, why the haste? Why the sudden change of heart? Why no proper dialogue with us as descendants of the enslaved to determine what a meaningful and sincere apology should minimally contain? How do these actions, taken without regard for how they will be experienced, felt, enhance, or diminish the fragile relationship that we already have within the kingdom? These are questions that hopefully the following discussion will clarify. As people of color, and in particular the descendants of slavery, we are emphatically disallowed to approach slavery and decoloniality in our own ways. We are discouraged to show emotion and to remain rational while we address trauma through the logic, lens, and statistics of the Western imperial paradigm. Negating their proximity to our humanity is the same tool they use to justify the dehumanization of our ancestors. Therefore, the ways in which we approach reparations and decoloniality cannot stem from this same paradigm. How we address reparations is equally as important as what we need to address. In other words, an apology cannot and should never have been crafted according to the terms of a mere Eurocentric paradigm. To do so would not only be an exercise of colonial obedience, but also a failure to truly understand and empathize with the sentiments of the human persons whom have historically been relegated as property and thus less than human. Therefore, it is imminent that the tools and language used in the discourse surrounding an apology for the atrocities that was the enslavement of our ancestors and the subsequent reparations be one that the process of finalizing the establishment of an advisory committee on slavery past, atonement, and reparations to ensure true research, engagement, and discussions by and with the people and diaspora communities of St. Martin. This will ensure that we we on St. Martin have a clear vision of what the full damage is and can articulate what actions will be necessary to repair such damage. So for St. Martin, the statements made today are indeed but the beginning of dialogue in which we must and will play the leading role. The Netherlands has proposed, and this was also part of the leaked information, to create a fund of 200 million euros for awareness and education, and investment of another 27 million euros to construct a slavery museum. That's what the rumor was. I didn't hear that necessarily confirmed today. Built on European soil, or if built on European soil, this institution is meant to bring awareness to the Dutch atrocities during their golden age, to the general population of the Netherlands. Ostensibly, such an enterprise can be conceived as an admittance of ignorance regarding the subject of slavery and colonialism. How, tell me, can a nation admittedly ignorant of their own colonial violence determine the conditions for an apology, yet alone reparations? How can a nation be sorry for something they admittedly know little to nothing about and have only recently seen the need to take the current actions? A complete about-face from just 9 months to a year ago. Again, we see here a demonstration of Eurocentric thinking, whereby it is dangerous and irresponsible to root an apology in the thoughts, the dogma of Eurocentric entitlement. What was the golden age to the Netherlands was an apocalypse for us. To frame Black and Indigenous people of color and Caribbean histories around coloniality alone recklessly perpetuates the notion that our narratives and identities can only exist in relation to the colonizer. We must be allowed the time and space needed to reconnect with our histories beyond coloniality as a precursor to setting the conditions for reparations. Under the purview of institutionally induced amnesia through colonial streams of pedagogy, how can we know what to negotiate for? If most of us cannot even remember who we are or have never learned who we are, and that is the reality of the Caribbean person, not just the St. Martin one, but all of us. The issues and the real implications of an apology and retribution are far more complex than any one of us can conceive alone. Therefore, I am reaching out not only to my own brothers and sisters here on St. Martin, and you know our special history as one island with 2 nations, 2 constituent states, or whatever they want to call us these days, but also to our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, particularly those in CARICOM, where we are in the process to become an associate state, and the CARICOM Reparations Committee, who are ready and willing to assist in this process, but not limited there, also to our brothers and sisters on the African continent. The Dutch West India Company's grip on the slave trade denotes transnational repercussions, both historically as well as presently. Via their slave entrepôts in Curaçao and Statia, many of our ancestors were shipped by the Dutch to and from places beyond the nations addressed in the apology. In other words, the Dutch owe an apology to more than just their Dutch Caribbean counterparts. By only addressing the apparent vestiges of Dutch imperialism in the contemporary political landscape, this apology fails in actually addressing the past while erasing the true and full scope of their colonial violence. It is with this thought I look forward to the outcome of the announced investigation of His Majesty the King into the royal family's contribution to the period of the enslavement of Africans and the transatlantic slave trade. Serve to absolve the perpetrator of guilt with minimal repercussions. As a proponent of these actions, as the precursor to an apology, I have formally requested last week that these actions state until they were ready to make their statements today. And as we heard, the Dutch Parliament will get it in writing, and so therefore, so will we today. And that was said mainly because the report and the subsequent statement was only approved by the Dutch government on Friday, December 16th. And as such, at me sometimes as well, allows for transparency. And this transparency crucially propels the decolonization process. Transparency helps to shed light on the structures and imbalances of power. Today, this is demonstrated by short-sighted proposals for colonial retribution, as well as the cost to our island nation of St. Martin to cover the visit of the Dutch royal family following this apology. For this apology today to be sincere, it must come with the realization that slavery and colonialism have impaired our people's economic and social development. Formally reported in various news media outlets this past week, institutionalized racism Netherlands. Colleagues at the Kingdom Ministry of Foreign Affairs have referred to African countries as Apen London, meaning monkey countries. The recent bullying and violence by citizens in Stophorst against the peaceful anti-blackface protesters is yet another example of existing racism in the Netherlands. It is clear that discrimination within the Netherlands, and I dare say even right here in St. Martin. So education and awareness is surely needed on all levels. These inherent prejudices, racism, and/or colorism are systematic and insidious, and they do not only affect the socio-economic disposition of the descendants of chattel slavery, but the very psyche, the spirit and soul of said persons, of all of us, whether we are aware of it or not. And I can tell you, having grown up with a parent that didn't want to hear any but indeed, it is past due the time for us to face. We too look at what has happened and accept it for what it was and move forward. Yes, not forgetting it, but building and using it to continue to be strong and resilient. According to the Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, PTSS, it is generation to the next, unknowingly, unconsciously. PTSS exists as a direct consequence of the multi-generational oppression of Africans and their descendants resulting from centuries of chattel slavery. And if we are to have any real discourse on restoration, reconciliation, and reparations, we must first identify and address PTSS that still lingers in our society today. On a side note, with my counterpart discussion just last week with the prefet of French Saint Martin and Saint Barts, we discussed this topic. And the discussion was the peoples of Guadeloupe, the peoples of Martinique behave differently. And they say that the people of Guadeloupe are seemingly a bit more aggressive. That was the assessment within the French former colonies. And the experiences they had as related to those in Martinique were completely different. And when I heard that statement, I said, PTSS. People react differently, people react violently even and aggressively and have no clue why certain words trigger them, why certain actions trigger them. This needs to be addressed. Provided thus far by the Netherlands can and should never be conceived of as part of reparations owed as a result of the expected apology. Reparations and aid as a result of crises are not to be discussed in the same breath as a sincere apology. Historically, with regard to the exercising our own agency and self-determination within aid and loans. This was the case after the only hope that with a truly sincere apology, would include the right to self-determination and agency. When working towards a new decolonial age of equity and equality, one should not be punished for colonial disobedience. As I come to the ends of my statement today, I trust that I have been critically, embracing the words that were stated here, but ensuring that though, based on our little talks held with those representatives that came since September 6th to now, that I can hear words like loke, who subsequently became one Tete Loke because of her spitfire behavior, that I can hear Tula being mentioned, and other archives, though little they may be. We find Kwashiba, we find Kwamina, who was my great enslaved ancestor. And I only learned about this 10 years ago when we celebrated our first emancipation, because of the same research done in our archives. And that is but one leg of the 4 grandparents that I have. And I also, because of our beautiful mixed community here, have 3 grandparents rooted in St. Martin and 1 in Suriname. So you will meet people in St. Martin with roots all over this Caribbean. And I think if we are to be serious moving forward in dialoguing, we cannot, and I must say, I have some other words that come close to it, but we have received an advice of a draft plan from the CRC, the Reparations Commission of CARICOM, in which it assess it against what has been uttered here today and what will be submitted to us in writing. And we reserve the right, as I said before, not to be placed on the spot today to accept or deny, but to pledge definitely to be at the forefront of any discussion, dialogue moving forward. It cannot be determined from the Euro side. It must be from those who are different, is that when we deal today in present day kingdom relations, there are certain things, certain behaviors that trigger that feeling of you are less than. And that must be addressed moving forward.
Thank you, Prime Minister. That was indeed symbolic of a critical embrace, not an ignoring of it, not a saying, I don't want to, we're not speaking, but a critical embrace. So thank you for the critical embrace of the apologies that have been uttered, and it's apologies, acknowledgement, and recovery. The word reparations is not used in the Netherlands. Recovery is used instead of reparations. And I think it will be good to have that discussion on the question of recovery. I realize that I did not introduce myself, so I probably should. I figured a lot of people know me. My name is Francio Guadalupe. I used to be the president of this university. I work currently as a senior researcher in one of the institutes of the Dutch Academy of Sciences, one of the institutes that is charged in the research of the royal family. The research institute is called the Royal Netherlands Institute for Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies. I've been briefly involved in the apologies of the city of Rotterdam for its atrocities in slavery, and Rotterdam has also been busy with recovery. They don't call it reparations as well. And I'd like to acknowledge someone who was instrumental in pushing this forward, and she is a person of St. Martin descent. She's currently an MP in the Dutch Parliament. Her name is Jorien Buiten. You will know her because she was also a minister plenipotentiary. And I think you should acknowledge the persons in your midst who actually pushed this, and Jorien was one of these persons. So she deserves that acknowledgement for sure. And I'm glad to hear the other persons besides Monteti Loke. When I teach in Amsterdam, I speak about Joseph Francis, who was a person who refused to accept subordination. And he was one of the persons who made Van Romont, which was a top family here, he recognized and he did hit Van Romont back. And he was one of many. So we should also acknowledge those persons and only have them taught in universities in Amsterdam, but also universities here. Right now, I would like to introduce the person who is going to chair the discussion, and then you will discuss with us. She is a PhD candidate in a research institute, a research program that I chair, and her name is Lisanne Charles. It's a research project on climate change. So Lisanne Charles, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good morning. When USM was approached about having the event here, we thought it was very important that persons across the spectrum of this discussion be allowed to give voice today. And so the Dutch representative invited a series of persons to come, and I'm going to invite them to come to the panel, after which they will give their presentations. And at the end of that, you in the audience will also get to ask them some questions. So first, we have Mr. Wycliffe Smith, who is now Dean of Academia at USM. Mr. Dean Smith, if you would come and sit right here, that would be excellent. Next, we have Marcelia Henry, who is instructor at the University of St. Martin and Secretary General of UNESCO, St. Martin. Next, we have Member of Parliament Melissa Gums, followed by Member of Parliament Ludmilla Duncan, followed by radio host and politician, Mr. Khalil Rivan. Then we will have a statement from Ms. Camilla Gums, who is a young St. Martiner, but unfortunately she cannot be here. She's away studying, but she sent her presentation. And lastly, I should also be sitting there. I will also give a response, but I prefer to stand, so I will be here. So having said all of that, I will now turn the mic over to Dean Smith.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning to all. The acknowledgements and recognition of people have already been done, so I will immediately start with some remarks. What does one say immediately after such a reaction, or how does one react to such an address? As I listened to the address of the Prime Minister, three things came to mind. The first thing that came to mind was the word finally. And finally, an official apology on the part of the Dutch state has been made. And I experienced an emotional moment when the Prime Minister was describing the atrocities and the dehumanization that came with slavery. That was a bit of an emotional moment to hear that again. The second thing that came to mind was, it's about time. This should have happened a long time ago. Such an address with an apology should have happened centuries ago, years ago. But it takes time to reach a point of acceptance and to have one's mind changed. And so we saw that change taking place even in the speech of the Prime Minister, who initially was not in favor, but now has been able to change his views on slavery. The third thing that came to mind was, nothing happens before its time. We all would have wished that this address that we heard this morning had taken place years ago, centuries ago, but it happened today. And we can complain, we can reject it, we can contest it, ignore it, or embrace it, as our moderator said. But the fact of the matter is that those words were uttered today, and the big question is, where do we go from here? How do we move forward? And I think that the University of St. Martin has a very important role to play as we move forward. And I'm speaking now in the capacity as interim dean of academics of the University of St. Martin, representing the president of the University of St. Martin, Dr. Carmona Bais, who unfortunately cannot be here because he is out of the country. I'd like to say that the advice presented in the report, Advies Dialooggroep Slavernijverleden, Ketenen van het Verleden, should be closely followed. This advisory group put a lot of research in writing this report, and I think it's quite an excellent report. And as I said before, the advices should be followed closely. And as I read it, I felt that the advices could be categorized in three broad categories, which already were mentioned. And one is acknowledgement, two, apology, and three, reparation. We call it here reparation. I noticed that that word, yes, was not used, and another word is used for it, but recovery has a different connotation for us in the Caribbean. And therefore, I would advise that the word reparation be used. First, acknowledgement that the Dutch should acknowledge the role played in the transatlantic slave trade and in the system of slavery. That was acknowledged today. We also heard an apology. The Dutch state apologized. I believe the apology sounded sincere to me, and it was an apology for the atrocities of slavery and for perpetrating crimes against humanity. And reparation, I'll use the word reparation, that should take place following sincere apologies. And of course, after an apology, there must be some form of compensation to the descendants of the people that have been enslaved. The advisory dialogue group clearly called for reparations on the part of the Dutch state. We see also in March 2019, the European Parliament issued a resolution on the fundamental rights of people of African descent in Europe. And this resolution also calls for apologies, for an end to racial profiling, for increased subsidies for people of African descent in academia, in the job market, and in other areas. And of course, here in the Caribbean, our CARICOM neighbors are calling for an apology and for reparations via the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice, which was issued in March 2014. So how can USM play a role? USM can play three roles, I think. I'd like to share with you: as facilitator, as researcher, and as advisor. USM can facilitate the discussion related to the three broad categories mentioned in the report, Ketenen van het Verleden. This means that USM can offer a platform where each group, namely the Dutch, as well as people of African descent, are given the opportunity to present their views on this sensitive topic. The university believes that dialogue is key if we want to achieve a successful end. We may not all agree on the method of achieving our goal. There will be differing and opposing opinions, but USM believes that all opinions must be respected. And as USM, we recognize that this discussion is long overdue. Currently, the discussion is happening under conditions that we did not choose or that we do not agree with. Nevertheless, the discussion has started, and everyone's opinion must be respected going forward. As researcher, USM should be a leader when it comes to research on the topic of slavery, and consequently offer data and objective information related to slavery and reparation from the perspective of country St. Martin. Research then can be used to facilitate the discussion and its outcome. And as advisor, USM, having been engaged in the research, USM should be one of the advisors on how to move forward with regard to reparations that would benefit country St. Martin and her people. USM believes that reparations should be geared to strengthen social, economic, and educational institutions. Reparations should be geared to support institutions in the social, economic, education, and public health sectors, among others. And of course, USM, as the only local institution for higher learning on education, would expect to benefit also from reparations as well. Reparations would give USM financial space and stability and would enable USM to move forward towards its ultimate goal, which is accreditation. USM would no longer need to be tagged to US or Dutch universities for accreditation, but we would be accredited on our own. An immediate action that I think could take place, and I'd like to end with that, I think a Kingdom's Reparation Commission should be appointed, modeled after the CARICOM Reparations Commission. And this KRC, Kingdom Reparations Commission, must be a true reflection of the countries and the Caribbean municipalities in the kingdom. The commission must establish the moral, ethical, and legal case for the payment of reparations by the government of the Netherlands and other relevant institutions, including Dutch universities, which have also profited from the slave economy. The KRC would also consider reparations to the countries and people of the Caribbean part of the Dutch kingdom for the crimes against humanity and for the continuous subordination of people in the Dutch Caribbean. In conclusion, the University of St. Martin needs to be a part of the conversation and consequently play a role in the further discourse on slavery past, apology, and reparations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Smith. Next, we will have Ms. Henry.
Pleasant good morning to one and all. I saw, good morning. Yeah.
Good morning.
Protocol already being established. I would like to state that today's statement by Prime Minister Rutte is a call for dialogue. It's a call for dialogue in our schools, in our community centers, at the University of St. Martin, in the senior citizens' homes, with the boys on the blocks and the girls, well, hopefully not on the block, but it is a call for dialogue. So that would be the first stance or the statement I would make. And it has to be a call for dialogue, not only with the academia. It is essential that the common man on the street participate in this dialogue. It's a call for dialogue for persons young, old, in between. Unless this does not happen, we will not be able to get a true representation, reflection of the St. Martin people. And that is what we need. We need the St. Martin people to respond to this speech. Now, I would like to state that As I was listening to the speech as an educator, I'm always making notes. So I'm going to say I recognize that the apology has been given, which, as was stated, long overdue. It is long overdue in the sense that this is something that the people have been asking for. And because the people have been asking for it, it should have happened sooner and not dictated by someone else. It must come from the people, and we must recognize that when the people speak, we need to not delay that conversation, that dialogue, that decision making that needs to take place. I also want to say that I recognize from the speech the horrific, inhumane treatment which the Prime Minister acknowledged that. And again, acknowledgement of the atrocities that took place must take place with any apology. Recognize that something was done, who it was done with, the manner it was done, so that both parties can acknowledge it and have a discussion on how we're going to move forward. I also want to recognize that the Prime Minister also mentioned that this is a healing process. But it cannot be a healing process if it is dictated from one direction. It must come from all areas. It cannot be one person leading the mantle or passing the baton. No, we all got to be running and moving forward and discussing this issue. So that is also something that I want to say. Healing process must be a collective, not an individual. So that too I want to mention by the statements that were mentioned, that were given. I also want to acknowledge that it was stated that the past cannot be changed, but we can face up to it. So I want to acknowledge that he mentioned that. And again, by him mentioning that, he is opening up that discussion for us. And therefore, we now need to continue with that. I also heard from his statement that this is phase one. This is the phase one process. And there are many phases that must take place thereafter, but we all have to be part of it. Now, after the speech, what transpires, what takes place now? I want to mention, just going back, it is correct, the topic of reparation was not brought forward. And in order for us to have an open discussion, this topic must be addressed. And it's, I don't want to say it is a pity, but it is a pity that it was not stated. Because if we're going to be participating in an open dialogue, you must acknowledge my stance, my position, and then we can move forward. I also want to mention that the CARICON 10-point plan for reparatory justice is ideal. It's a template that we on St. Martin must look at, must bring to the table when we're having this dialogue. The other point I want to mention concerning the speech, and I do want to recognize that he did mention the importance of cultural heritage visibility on this topic, the awareness that this needs to take place through our education. He talked about also, I think I heard, a fund for social initiative. I think I heard that. Did I hear that correct? All right. But then they were thrown out there, but there was nothing tangible thereafter. And I think that's where the phase one is necessary. And I am very happy that he stated this is phase one, because I would like to have fun discussion more about elaborated versions that were mentioned and the exhibitions that were mentioned and the public debates When does this take place? I did not hear a time period. Is that taking place now? Is that taking place tomorrow? Where is this going to take place? Will this take place only in the Netherlands? Will this also take place in St. Martin? Would this take place collectively as a Dutch kingdom? So there were a lot of questions that were not answered by the speech. Finally, so that I can also give others the opportunity to also give their comments, one more thing I want to mention. He stated, "Today, I apologize on behalf of the Dutch government." But what about the monarchy? The monarchy is also part of this picture as well. So I did recognize that he mentioned that the king will be participating in July 1st emancipation events, which is a start, but the monarchy also needed to be addressed further. So to summarize, I want to thank PM Rutter for his presentation, for his speech, for opening up the dialogue, and for starting the process that should have taken place years ago. But nonetheless, we are happy that it took place, and we look forward to what will take place thereafter. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Henry. MP Gums.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and protocol having been established, good morning still to those gathered here with us and joining online via other means. I apologize for my voice. Yesterday was a very active World Cup final. I thought for a very long time about what my words would be today. Any question surrounding the history of the transatlantic slave trade is rightfully uncomfortable and emotionally charged. That it happened, that it existed, and that in many countries in the world, its descendants continue to feel its impact is a fact that demands action. At the September 2022 session of the IPCO gathering in the Netherlands, the role that the Kingdom of the Netherlands played in the transatlantic slave trade was one of our more heated agenda points. And one of the excellent speakers from the city of Rotterdam, Mike Bindraban, kept using the key phrase, geen woorden, maar daden. No words, but actions. With this statement, this apology, which has been a topic of discussion in international media since 2021, I would have preferred for the Dutch government to have embraced Mr. Bindraban's phrase of geen woorden maar daden. Now, as this apology comes amidst a flurry of stubborn voices in the Netherlands and combative voices locally, I find myself wondering, now what? Like many, and like Ms. Henry said. Since I prefer not to be overt negative, I have some suggestions about the now what. They stem from the feelings I have regarding this apology and from the discussions myself and people I respect very much have had throughout these first 12 years of St. Martin's history as a young country. The now what has to include continued self-reflection and self-study, especially on the part of the Dutch government, the people of the Netherlands, but most importantly, the royal family. I urge for self-reflection and self-study because it doesn't surprise me that a country that doesn't teach nearly enough of its own history of colonization to its citizens now makes an apology that is not backed by action. It's too simplistic to say, oh, they know. They may know a small part, but the magnitude of it all, I don't believe they know. And I understand why. Our ancestors weren't taken to Rotterdam, Den Haag, or Maastricht. They were brought here to Suriname, to Curaçao, Saba, Statia, and Aruba. There are no slave-built walls staring at them on the Avier, no remnants of the huts that our ancestors slept, wept, and died in. No daily reminders of the horrors that their ancestors put ours through, only remnants of what their ancestors reaped, most notably in the golden gilded royal carriage, for example. Why is this type of education on both sides of the Atlantic important? It's important because to issue an effective apology, a people, a government, a nation needs to know the extent of the wrong that has been done. I firmly believe that this apology should have been based on a feeling of regret and collective Dutch historical guilt, very similar to the collective guilt that Germans and their co-conspirators were made to feel and are meant to feel about the atrocities of World War II, including the Holocaust. The apology should not come as a political stunt based on Dutch business interests or an apology that lacks at the very onset dialogue on what an apology should look like or include. Then, very understandably, it does not come across as genuine. It's coincidental that Minister Kuipers mentions the Dutch education system and the inclusion of slavery, because in my preparation for today, the slight bright spot here is that there are significant strides being made in Dutch schools and via the overall curriculum reviews regarding the Dutch role in the slave trade that my St. Martin friends in the Netherlands were kind enough to send me the data on. There is still a ways to go, but each step is significant. For ourselves, for St. Martin, now is the time for constructive, effective, and efficient dialogue, and for public consultation regarding what we want the legacy of our history to be. We have squandered much of it through locally taken decisions as I look at what we have done to the Great Salt Pond, the reason our ancestors were brought here. I urge the government, as they compile the committee mentioned by the Prime Minister in Parliament, to ensure that the voices added to this committee have a tangible and realistic vision for what St. Martin's role will be as we move forward in these discussions. And to the public, to my co-panelists, to the government, and to whoever ends up on said committee, I emphatically ask that they bear in mind that reparatory justice in the form of remuneration is necessary. But let us not act as if it is the be-all, end-all of the issue of decolonization and the end of colonialism. This goes beyond a constitutional status and money. Decolonization is a matter of examining the legacy of our history outside of the European Dutch state as well, of the fact that we are still currently coexisting with the descendants of both slave and slave master on our little island of St. Martin. And we must find a way to move forward from all of it. We must find a way to move on together from all of colonization's effects, including our dependency on hypercapitalism, the system that drove colonization, our misogynistic and patriarchal culture and its impact on the rights of our women and children, and our treatment of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered St. Martiners at home and abroad. All of these elements are also part of colonialism's ugly legacy and are most definitely worth examining and changing if those who claim to be true to the movement of decolonization are actually true to it. I welcome those future discussions. I thank Prime Minister Rutte for opening the dialogue, and I look forward to the panel today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MP Gums, MP Duncan. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good morning. It is 11:59. Still to you, to everyone here present, it is my honor to be here, not only as a citizen, but as a representative of the people. I must thank USM for this dialogue. I also have to thank Dr. Guadalupe for the term critically embrace, because it has been quite an experience over the last couple of weeks. How do you not only hear everyone's voice, but respect everyone's voice and opinion? And I will be using this term critically embracing moving forward. We are in an extremely historic, albeit controversial time in our history, but I acknowledge that everyone has a part to play, and so I am not only appreciative, but I am honored to be a part of it. First, and Minister Kuipers mentioned this, everyone else mentioned this as well, we are sitting on the Great Salt Pond where our ancestors toiled to ensure that a nation, not here, but across the Atlantic Ocean, was developed, and that is important. But we need to remember them as well, not only the work that they did. Slavery was a crime against humanity, and so today should be about humanity, us remembering the humanity in all of us and thinking about how we should move forward. The approach, I must acknowledge today by Prime Minister Rutte, was colonialist in its nature, its delivery. The Prime Minister mentioned as well her experience in trying to understand what to expect. However, the apology was issued and we have officially entered a new era in our collective history. I acknowledge that. Sir Hilary Beckles once said that apologies are stage one of an effort that says we acknowledge the harm we have caused and we are prepared to enter phase two, which is a discussion and negotiation about how to repair that harm and suffering that continues to be the legacy in the Caribbean today. We are not unique. We are a part of a greater picture, a greater group, and that is something that we should also cherish. I concur with everyone today that the apology without a discussion on repair, healing, and reparatory justice won't work for us. Needs to be more than that. The legacies of colonialism has left this nation in particular and others in the kingdom with not only democratic but developmental deficits that require continued discussion on remedies and the sustainable implementation of projects, programs, and funding streams that will ensure reparatory climate action. We are literally living on the front lines of climate change. We do not know when our country will be impacted again. Climate action has to be a part of reparatory justice. The alleviation of poverty. Our people have been driven into poverty, especially over the last 15 years. The improvement of our education system and the development of our economy is imperative. These discussions have to take place as a part of a bigger discussion on reparatory justice. So now I say there is a need to create reparatory economies in our kingdom. There is a need for us to raise our consciousness on who we are as a people, who we are as citizens in this kingdom, and our actions need to match those changing mindsets. The King of the Netherlands is now researching the impact of slavery on the crown. We are, even in St. Martin, still in the process of discovery. The government is doing their work. Parliament has also commenced some work in our society. We see the current or the consistent calls for our schools to have local heritage and history curriculums developed at all education levels. But we must also recognize that this will be a concerted effort from everyone in the society at all levels, in all countries, supported by all governments. A friend asked me recently, what do we really have the power to change? Well, I told him, if Quincy Gario didn't protest in a shirt that said Zwarte Piet is racisme, if George Floyd wasn't killed and people all over the world protested in the name of Black Lives Matter, if a petition did not go out to the UN, if the motion to create the Slavery Dialogue Group wasn't passed, if Mia Mottley wasn't elected, if all of us in here wasn't in the positions we are today, we would not be experiencing this moment right here. So we all have a part to play, no matter how small it might seem. There is a power in making meaningful changes, but we have to realize that that power is magnified collectively. We might not see it when it's just us alone. I am not aware of how many of us know that Nigeria and Benin apologized for slavery. The countries of our ancestors who were involved in selling their own to the colonists have asked the African diaspora for forgiveness and reconciliation. The Prime Minister mentioned this, that we need to heal, that we need to also confront who we are and what was done and what the remnants of slavery are within us, people of color, people of African descent. Today, the government of the Netherlands has apologized. I agree with my colleagues. I await for the Crown as well to apologize, to recognize, to acknowledge, to reconcile the crime against humanity that was slavery. I recognize that this is just the beginning, and I know that we all in here will make a conscious effort to be a part of lifting all our peoples up and moving forward together in truth. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we continue to the next speaker, I just had two reminders, and I definitely need to say this. Can everyone please ensure that their phones are off? It's a bit disruptive when people are talking and the phones are going off. So please just check, confirm that your phone is off. Yes, Mr. Ivan, the mic is now yours. You got to put it on.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I want to thank the university for inviting me to be here. I'm not as distinguished as all of my other co-panelists, but I guess I do have somewhat to say on the subject. As those that know me in the room, I usually try to prepare in advance, but on this subject, I really came unprepared. I really wanted to hear what the Honorable Prime Minister had to say on the subject matter without any preconceived notions. And given the fact that I wasn't even sure if it was an apology, what it was a statement on a report, I wasn't sure. So I really did not want to come with any preconceived notions. But with that being said, I want to first say today is a day that in a long time I got a feeling that I have not felt. And that is a feeling of being proud, extremely proud to be a St. Martiner. And I felt that feeling today by the Prime Minister's words. And I'm talking about our Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister of St. Martin. She made me extremely proud today. I felt she stood up for and spoke for and on behalf of the people of this country. So I want to thank you for doing that. You did an excellent job. When I think of an apology, there's certain things that one would look for. You want to ensure that the person seems truthful. So there's some level of remorse. The person seems contrite. So they're showing some level of empathy. They acknowledge the action that would have caused the need for an apology. And they give you some sense of recompense on what is going to happen after that. And I have to say that I felt that the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mr. Mark Rutte, did most of that. So if you want to ask, did he check the boxes? Yes, he did check the boxes. However, I am still disappointed in the apology overall. And for a particular reason. The very first reason is he started off in his speech to me speaking from a third person and a very distant third person perspective, where he did not really, and in essence to me, removing himself and the people of the Netherlands from the horrors that were transpired. And I think that he did not recognize that the government and the people of the Netherlands were the ultimate beneficiary of the atrocities that took place in these islands. And so they were the ultimate beneficiaries of the proceeds of slavery, and that was not acknowledged. And I think in your apology, you have the who, the what, the where, and the when, but the importance was the why. Why did they do this to us? Right? So when you hit a child, you don't hit a child and say, boy, I'm sorry I hit you. You say, no, I hit you because of this. And there was a reason why they brought us into slavery, and it was for their financial benefits. And I think that was not acknowledged, right? And the second point, I think, was and I keep hearing this term used here, was the overall, and forgive me for using this term, though it may sound a bit racist, the whitewashing of the crimes that took place against our people. We continue to use this term, crimes against humanity, but that does not give what really took place. The genocide that took place, the murder, the rape, the theft, those are the crimes that actually happened to our people. And so to me, until the Prime Minister and the Dutch state recognizes specifically those sort of crimes and actions that took place to our people and are able to empathize and understand why we feel the trauma that we have felt, why we have this generational trauma, I don't think that the apology is going to be as true as it should be. Right? I don't think the people will be able to accept and feel the empathy from the Honorable Prime Minister, because it seems to brush over very cleanly what has transpired with us. And that is not the actual trauma that is felt. The trauma is not a clean, whitewashed trauma. The trauma and pain that we still feel today from the effects of slavery is real. It is not a very academic term. It is real suffering that people face today. And I think, I'm not sure her name, but the second lady that spoke, Miss Henry, yes, Miss Henry, I think she gave a fact of the matter that is correct. I think that, again, this is a very academic and distinguished panel, but the true effects of slavery is felt by the people on the ground, right? Those that are having suffering or challenges with education, those that are still suffering from the health challenges, the hypertension and the diabetes, and those are the people that are actually still today suffering. And until we, again, hear their stories, hear their trauma, and get to empathize and understand with them, only then can we get a true apology from the Dutch state and the Dutch people overall, because again, we cannot forget the why, and the why was the ultimate beneficiary of the proceeds from slavery. I'm going to make this sort of short, but lastly, while everyone is again on the reparations and the financial, I think again, for me, before all of that can be done, we get another word that has not been clearly emphasized on, well, two words, is racism and colonial racism and institutional racism that continues to plague the people of the descendants of slaves today. I think that we have heard no apologies, not even a recognition of colonialism or neocolonialism that still affects us today. Here we have our brothers and sisters in St. Eustatius that have had their democracy removed. And if we are talking about the removal and apology of slavery, it is to recognize the dignity of our people, and one cannot be dignified with the removal of their democracy. Here we are today in St. Martin, still suffering from the Kingdom Charter, Articles 2, 44, 51, and 50, that still allows the Dutch state to remove our dignity and step in and do as they please without recognizing our dignity and our pride as a people. So in saying that, we want to offer an apology. I look forward to it. I will wholeheartedly embrace it without any criticism, as long as it understands and recognizes the empathy that needs to be shown to a people that has suffered a lifetime of generational atrocities, right? Again, the atrocities did not end and begin in slavery and we just let it pass. No, those atrocities were continued through the Kingdom Charter, which was not recognizing us even then after slavery as people. And then we went into the 1954 or 45 period where we still were not wholeheartedly recognized as a people, where we're still being talked down to. Forgive me for saying this, but I have to say to the Honorable Prime Minister, she was hung up on by members of the Dutch state. She was disrespected by the members of the Dutch state, and still here she is today, giving dignified responses to an apology that to me wasn't fully, I don't know if the word, use the word fully, the only thing I can say is true. The only thing I can say is true. You cannot slap me and tell me you apologize for the pain I felt from your slap. Right? You have to apologize for the fact that you have slapped me and then establish why and how you will not be slapping me again. And that is, we did not hear either in this apology. How are we going to remove racism and ensure that our people's pride will not and dignity will not continue to be trampled on? We will see that a Dutch judge has issued a statement at which we have heard nothing from the parliament nor the Council of Ministers in the Netherlands, where a Dutch judge issued that to be Dutch is to be blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And again, I think at some point in time, the institutional racism that plagues us as a people, which is I don't want to say derivative of slavery, needs to be addressed. And I think all of that in the apology needs to be recognized. How are we going to stomp out racism, institutional and systemic racism? How are we going to ensure that we put back pride and dignity into a people whose pride and dignity has been removed? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rivan. We have two statements left. And because I don't want to be the one saying the last statement, I'm going to read mine very quickly, and then I'm going to read the one from Camilla Gums. And then after that, we have a few minutes for questions before we hand back over to Dr. Guadalupe, and also, of course, to Minister Kuipers. So again, good day to all in the room and those listening virtually. So today, in light of the Prime Minister of the Netherlands statement, there is room for reaction and discussion, and so I offer my contribution here. You, Minister Kuipers, have come and brought with you a message from your government to us. But it is also said that you have come to listen and to relay what is said to your government and Prime Minister as well. And so I also give you a message to take back. The first of which is we are still waiting for the English version of the report. It was promised, but it was not delivered. Secondly, while this statement and this moment can be acknowledged, they cannot be seen as an endpoint, as has been said many times today. This is just a continuation of conversations started long before this by people on the ground on these islands and in their diasporas in the Netherlands, and hopefully the beginning of more intense conversations on and across all levels about what a future may look like for us. In 2015, I started a poem with the lines, "We the offspring in the diaspora, the stolen children of Africa," under the title Draft 1. In 2018, I completed that poem called Restitution, and I want to read it to you so that it's something that you can all take back to your Prime Minister and government. It reads, "We the offspring in the diaspora, the stolen children of Africa, demand retribution for the work of our elders who survived the Ma'afa, for their forced contributions to the building and boosting of your nation and institutions, and for the lives of our ancestors who did not, but whom neither time nor the collective that is us forgot. For what is the value of a life? What is the value of a life? What is the value of a life and of a laborer? What is the value of millions of Black Holocaust victims and their descendants who you still call alien, as if you did not bring us here and there, as if you did not bring them here and there, as if they did not do more than their share, as if their backs did not bend and sometimes rip, as if you did not profit from their blood bitter when spilled, as if still the legacy of the erasure of their cultures and humanity does not cause insanity within their communities somehow, sometimes. As if we, their descendants, do not have to continue to find ways to undo all that has been done, as individual or as groups, trying to regroup, to recoup the lost parts of ourselves, to reclaim some semblance of truth about who we were and who we are. And so we have come, demanding restitution, arming ourselves with tools for restoration, individual and collective revolutions for reparations, because we owe them that, and so do you. Those who have gone before us and those that will follow, not to swallow the bitter pill that is partial history, but to rebel and agitate and reason until what happened is finally seen as treason against humankind. Until we continue to find ways to say what needs to be said, that what is owed to us is not a favor. And we are not victims. We are not victims. We are not victims. But we are the heirs of history, and so the heirs of our stories come to make claims for their labors, and we will have it and set ourselves free. In 2016, I wrote an article for the University of St. Martin's online journal Commentaries entitled, "Nigger, Are You Crazy? Imagining Equality in the Kingdom of the Netherlands." This title was a take on a Dutch journalist's inappropriate use of the word for a book review of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, which drew ire from all across the world. The journalist and the paper argue and maintained that the word nigger and the word neger carry different stories, different histories, though many Black folks in the Netherlands and also in the Caribbean islands argued that within context, the sting was just the same. In my article, I speak to the ways in which finances, language, place of birth within the kingdom, race, and other factors intersect to perpetuate colonial hierarchies within the kingdom. These are factors which must be addressed and a hierarchy which must be dismantled. Some have heard the poem read before and read that article that I wrote for Commentaries and said, "Lisanne, you sound angry," as if anger is a bad thing. But Audre Lorde said, "Anger is loaded with information and energy. Anger expressed and translated into action in the service of our vision and our future is a liberating and strengthening act of clarification. For it is in the painful process of this translation that we identify who are our allies, with whom we have grave differences, and who are our genuine enemies." To this, I also say on the islands, we must also harness and translate our anger into action to fight and dismantle all of the isms: capitalism, classism, sexism, ableism, and also all of the phobias, homophobia, xenophobia, and the like, so that prevent us from doing the work across differences and across borders. In 2021, I ran for the national elections in the Netherlands from Sable because I wanted to champion a more equal kingdom. Again, quoting from Audre Lorde, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. In that campaign, I also reiterated time and time again, there were many things that had to be looked at to undo the hierarchies that continue to exist within the kingdom. And so we must continue to talk about full liberation, financial, cultural, political, linguistic, etc., on every layer and every level of this political constellation. And a part of those conversations, Mr. Kuipers, is reparations. Reparations indicates a willingness to repair after wrongs. Reparations, not recovery. And in our context, reparation must be discussed hand in hand with development. Referencing again the hierarchies addressed earlier, researchers Roth, Ariza, and Orlowski write in a complementary relationship, reparations and development, a well-designed reparations program can help rebalance power. Even services such as schools, road, or health centers can benefit everyone living in that area and may help rebalance power. I could go on, but I am beyond my own word limit. So I will end by saying this, Mr. Kuipers. There is an opportunity to do things differently. Let today be the beginning of a rebalancing of a very unbalanced kingdom, rooted in its colonial past and also in the period of enslavement, dehumanization, and exploitation of African peoples. Right that wrong. Thank you. And finally, statement by the person who would have been the youngest on the panel, in her early 20s, Ms. Camilla Gums, who is a master's student of political science with a concentration in international relations at Northeastern University. She has a passion for policy and a vision to see St. Martin take its rightful place on the global stage. And her statement reads as such: the Dutch government's reaction to the document Chains of the Past is something that will not have any impact on how we function day to day on St. Martin. From a policy and political standpoint, this is the first step for the Netherlands to make amends on the global stage as they've received pressures from the United Nations and the new findings of oil in Guyana, where there were the historical Dutch presence and a neighbor to Suriname. While I mentioned the actions of the Dutch government regarding this apology aren't something we need to fuss about, this should be the time to have important conversations about our stance as a country within the kingdom. The Charter of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which is commonly referred to as the Statute, is a document that has outlined the relationship between the Netherlands and the Dutch Caribbean since 1954. While it was adjusted to reflect the change of 10-10-10, there hasn't been a true revision of how we interact with each other within the kingdom. And that is the problem. Functioning on a document that is reflective of the past means how we function is archaic. So what do we have to do now that we are here discussing the harms of the Dutch in the past and how it impacts the future? The first step is to have a dialogue. Speak with people. From grassroots organizations to government, we function solely in bubbles and only listen and engage with persons who agree with our stance 100%. That is ineffective for any meaningful change. The issue is we lack discipline and we lack the skill of diplomacy. We want to yell about what we believe we are entitled to before we have any previous conversations. Would you walk up to your neighbor and tell them they are entitled to give you the extra bag of sugar in their cabinet because you don't have any sugar and you saw them take the last one from the shop? No, you wouldn't. And your neighbor might even never speak to you again. That's the problem we have here in St. Martin. We are quick to blame, alienate, refuse to converse, and not hold ourselves accountable for our actions. So it becomes impossible to have the conversations around remuneration and how the Dutch can assist in helping us build a better St. Martin. St. Martin is a unique country. We boast about our people, our culture, and what we provide. But how can we continue to be boastful about ourselves if we are not working on correcting our wrongs and improving our community? The issue we have when we start yelling about reparations and the path to independence is that we are 20 steps ahead and haven't started with an outline. A friend of mine made a statement, and I believe describes our issue as a people perfectly. Focused on the horizon and not the shore. We dream, sing, and dance about us being a free country away from the colonial bondages. But if we look at our shore right now, it is dirty bad. Our education systems are crumbling. Our ecosystems are dying. For Christ's sake, leave the mangroves alone. And our people are hungry, struggling to pay rent and GB. The average man is debating if they have the will to survive. Why are you so hell-bent on this apology when we got other things to sort out first? My stance is simple. The apology is whatever. Thanks, no thanks. We know the Netherlands is a mega colonizer and needs to be held accountable for their crimes. I am curious to see the findings from the investigation. However, the fact that we are wasting our time and energy to argue about whether we accept it or not, and this is what should really happen, instead of community work, holding our elected officials accountable and doing adequate research, would tell you that CARICOM's 10-step plan doesn't make any sense. This is disappointing and laughable. And those are the words of the youngest among us. So we now have exactly 10 minutes for some questions. If there are questions or statements from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I will bring the mic for you or a statement. If you have either, please keep it to around 30 seconds, 40 seconds, so that we can get in as many as possible, but also so that the panelists have an opportunity to respond if you have a question for somebody. A question right there with the lady in the red and then with the gentleman in the white shirt.
Good evening.
Yes.
Very short. Oh, I clearly look surprised. There's one line that I want to share with you, and it comes from the Panam song, and it says, "Abi been a hiram long time, but Bokra been a hidem." And it simply means that with this apology, the same rhythm, modus operandus, has been once again employed, in that secrecy is surrounding this whole process. Okra bin Ahidem simply means that they keep the news from us. They hide it from us. Hollis and Martin running around scrambling to meet this apology. No schools involved, no young students involved. An apology for an atrocity that dates back hundreds of years, that chronicles not, and I like how you say, because we're not the victims, it chronicles the story of a destroyed soul, a person that everything that was perpetuated on someone else is a reflection of the inner landscape of the person that committed the crime. We are not the person that committed the crime, nor are we the victims. In Tegendeel, we have shown how strong we are, how powerful we are at every attempt to subjugate us, diminish us. We have risen above every attempt to eradicate the presence of the African in the Caribbean. So this idea, Bokra, of hiding, of trying to throw something at us at the last minute and have a bunch of informed people trying to scramble to find some way. It's just a reflection of the modus operandus of how the machinery works. Again, it reiterates quite clearly, you do not matter to me. This is my apology to me. This is me trying to, assuage my guilty conscience. This is trying to find some way to bring a verbiage. But all you do once again is highlight your inconsideration. All you do is highlight your lack of respect. Because I asked my niece, 17 years old, are you aware of what's going to happen Monday the 19th? And she has no clue. No school teacher talking to young persons. I call my neighbors in Barbados, in Trinidad, in Jamaica. I call colleagues. Does anyone know about this monumental moment that is supposed to be taking place? And no one knew about it. That is is complete irreverence for the very person you say you're going to try to bring some reverence to. The mirror needs to be held to yourselves. You are the perpetuator, not us. We have shown consistently the strength of every attempt at trying to eradicate the Africans in the Caribbean. 30 seconds, that was my moment. So Buckra, do your homework. Check yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm giving a little introduction to the question, and the question is for Minister Kuipers. Until very recently, the Prime Minister Rutte did not see the importance or the need for an apology. And for those in the Netherlands around us, I don't know if people have heard of the book Zeven Vinkjes. It's about people who do not understand what the people of color go through. So it's predominantly white, straight, male who don't understand the feminist movement, the people of color movement, the LGBT movement. And as our Prime Minister of St. Martin mentioned, institutionalized racism has been coming up in different aspects in the Netherlands, which the Dutch government has admitted to. The social welfare scandal recently at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Zwarte Piet movement. So going back to the Zeven Vinkjes, if the general population in the Netherlands does not agree with the apologies, and if the general population, including the ones who run the country, don't understand the struggle that people of color go through in the Netherlands, whether they're from the Caribbean or they've been in the Netherlands with Caribbean roots, how are they to understand the struggle and to create a sincere apology? That's question one. Question two is, how is the Netherlands then willing to tackle institutionalized racism in the Netherlands to create actual equity? And that would mean that this fund for bewustwording van het slavernijverleden is not really a fund for us, but a fund for them. And how would we create equity in the end? And I can give an example. Suriname talks about people from Surinamese nationality being able to study in the Netherlands for European tuition fees, is an example. But for us, we have the same struggle going to the Netherlands that culturally we're not part of the Netherlands, and the struggle you can see in the students, especially from St. Martin who do not speak Dutch. Where are programs like that the Netherlands is able to fund for more streamlining and bridging of cultures for people that come to the Netherlands from the Dutch Caribbean? So it's a few questions in one.
Well, I get it. Sorry, I'll stand up, right? So thank you very much for the questions. And first of all, and I'll reflect later on the dialogue overall, but when it comes to these questions, what you clearly point out is that the Netherlands and the Dutch population, citizens of the Netherlands, have a long way to go. And I can tell you in all honesty, if I look at my children, who are in the age of students at the moment, they're between 21 and 26. They have had already during school a totally different perspective than what I get when I went one generation before. And this is very rapidly changing. And you're absolutely right that there are many, many more steps to go. Amongst others, in terms of, for instance, provision of education, higher education, which is now rapidly occurring with many students from all over the world coming to the Netherlands. But it's only a start. We have to do much more than that.
Thank you. And because we are running rapidly out of time, I would like to actually thank everyone on the panel and then actually turn the mic over again to Dr. Guadalupe, who will give the last words and also give the podium back to Minister Kuipers. So thank you all very much. And of course, if there are questions for them afterwards, they will be around.
Thank you, Lisanne. Thank you, panelists. We're coming to the end. I think I first will give Minister Kuipers the opportunity to respond, and then I will give a few closing remarks. So, Minister Kuipers, please.
me put the microphone up and down, but first of all, let me really thank you for allowing me to be part of this debate here today. And thank for the very open and frank and clear words that you all spoke. I took my notes. It's very difficult to immediately reflect, but just take for one that I will definitely bring your words and your input back to the Netherlands, not only to the cabinet or to the king, but to the population of the Netherlands. And if you allow me, and then I'll put up my glasses to reflect on a couple of things, because we spoke, thanks to our chair, to our moderator, we spoke about critically embracing. And I think if I just can take it in one word, I feel that you have done so in great pride, and rightfully so. It's that you are very, very proud of your history and of the situation and where you are now. And what I also noted in line with that is, Minister, if you take our words and you see our anger, realize that anger is loaded with information and energy. And what you pointed out is that there is no single issue in our lives, not here, nor in the Netherlands. This reflects a much larger discussion. And I think that that was a very, very clear message, but also an opportunity to do things different. And then some of you mentioned the words like finally, and long overdue. It may not be the good time, but there is a moment, and happy that it took place at least. With all the further remarks that came to that. And also the remark that even when we are all together here with a limited audience, and even if it's just one day and one morning, it is a historical moment, not so much in just the day today, but in that it may start a further movement. One of you mentioned it, a new era in collective history. And that would then be the need for a clear dialogue, dialogue with, as mentioned, that starts also with the common man and with children, school children here, but I can tell you also in the Netherlands, because we need to educate our children differently. I mentioned just that my children already got a lot more information than when I went to school, but I think that by the time that I have grandchildren, my boys do not like the thought at all that there may be grandchildren at one moment, but if they go to school, that they have a totally different perspective. And that perspective, and thanks also for clearly remarking the role that the University of St. Martin can help in this, in doing the research, in guiding and facilitating discussion, in advice, but also in the education. And then I look at you, and the education should be here, but also in the Netherlands. So the University of St. Martin can greatly help with developing these programs also in the European mainland. And then you might remark, please follow the advices of the advisory group. They were very clear. Acknowledge, apologize, and also when moving further, think about that for us, a very important requisite of this whole process is not just what we call the recovery, but I clearly heard your call about reparations, about new developments, public health, and other issues. And I will gladly bring that back to the Netherlands. And let me also mention then, there is not a single word, a single sentence, a single speech, a single moment in time or a single place that suffices to do justice to this long history, to all the terrible things that were being done. But please accept that the way we look at it is a start of a dialogue here together, and make it a brighter and different future that enables us also in a way to recognize what happened, and as such come to a movement to a new future. And I thank you very, very much for that. Thank you.
they're all, we've come to the end of this presentation, this historical event, and what will follow from that. I've listened well, and I've not used the word reparations, and I've now understood that it's very important when you speak English to use the word reparations. I was thinking about Dutch, repareren, and I would say you cannot repair a human being. That's why I never used the word. But I understand that in English we should use the word reparations. So in following, I will do so. Two more things. I believe that the dialogue group did something well because there were 4 recommendations that I gave in a paper. One recommendation was to deal with the questions in the Netherlands. In places like Rotterdam, 1 in every 8 persons in Rotterdam has roots in people who experience slavery, 1 in every 8. So it's not a small group, it's a significant group in certain parts of the Netherlands. That's why the struggle in the Netherlands is important. And that's why you have to do something for that. Secondly, I pushed for what it's called, a Koninkrijksfonds, whatever you want to call it, for something that has to prepare these countries for the 21st century. And I think someone was correct, Ludmila, who spoke about climate change. Climate change is urgent. It's also urgent that we are now experiencing some countries that have no respect for any rule of law. We have to remember that rule of law should matter, respect should matter, dignity for human beings should matter, human rights should matter. That's why I said that is significantly important. And I've taken everything that the Prime Minister has said. I critically embrace it. I accept it because I think it was correct in all its facets. And lastly, if people ask me, and they ask me in the Netherlands, are you a descendant of slaves or enslaved? I generally speaking say no. I am a descendant of people who experienced slavery. If you want to call me a name, call me one of the black survivors, as Bob Marley called me, and that's what I learned. Call me a arrivant, a descendant of those people who arrived, who did not drown in the sea. Call me those, or call me, if you want to speak Papiament, call me a Katibu. And a Katibu is not a slave or enslaved. A Katibu is someone who was captured and who has been struggling for their freedom. If we can start to call ourselves this way, this is the way I call myself. I'm a descendant of the Katibus. I'm a descendant of those who survived. I'm a descendant of those who arrived. And I'm a descendant of persons who will strive and survive and continue to push forward. If we can do that, I think we can start the conversation with administrators in The Hague and other places on the basis of equity, recognizing that victim age happened, but we are not victims. Let me stop by that. Thank you. Let's
you.